Welcome, everyone. The summit is now live. Tracy, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I'd like to welcome everybody today, and thank you so much for joining us at the Security in the Cloud 2015 event, sponsored by Nutanix and Citrix. I'm Tracy Cook with RedmondMag.com and Virtualization and Cloud Review. Again, we're really pleased that you're here to watch our show today. In this half-day summit, we'll get you up to date on everything you need to know and do to prepare your cloud infrastructure to be secure against attacks in 2021. We'll host 3 sessions featuring one of our editors and hand-picked industry experts. Each session includes a presentation followed by a Q&A session, and you can see the full agenda on the resource tab and probably about now on your console. Before we begin, let me take care of a few housekeeping details. This event is being recorded and will be available for future viewing. You can log into the system in a couple hours using the same link you're currently using to take a look, and we'll also be sending you an email with all the replay information. At the end of each presentation, we'll host a Q&A session. Be sure to take this opportunity to get your questions answered by our experts. And finally, our sponsors have provided some resources that can be found on your console along with all 3 presentations. Now I'd like to welcome Scott Becker, Editorial Director of RedmondMag.com and Virtualization Review. Scott will be hosting all 3 sessions today, starting with top 7 cloud security attack vectors heading into 2021. So as always, Scott, it's great to have you here. Welcome, and please take it away.
Thanks, Tracy. Appreciate it. And everyone, I'm very happy to be here today. And I'm also excited that we're going to start off with an interactive Q&A session between me and Ian Thornton Trump, who's the CISO at CyJax. And let me tell you a little bit about Ian's background. And I apologize there. I dropped a letter on Ian's title. CISO,
right.
Not CIO. But so Ian's an ITIL certified IT professional with 25 years of experience in IT security and information technology. Served with the Canadian Forces, Military Intelligence Branch, with the CF Military Police Reserves, and retired as a public affairs officer in 2013. And he's been with he was with RCMP as a criminal intelligence analyst, and he's worked as a cybersecurity analyst and consultant for multinational insurance, banking, and regional healthcare. And now he's Chief Information Security Officer for CyJax Limited. And Ian, I'll just say what I love about having you on sessions like this is you combine deep security knowledge with that experience with law enforcement and intelligence. And then you've got business experience, and then you always keep up to date with the latest news. So you've always got a hot take that's deeply informed, and it makes you perfect for these kind of things. So thank you so much for being on.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And man, you've set some high expectations for this one. I shall not disappoint.
Outstanding. So and maybe you could just briefly tell everybody about CyJax and what your day-to-day is like, with your current position, because I think it's relevant to the kind of stuff we're going to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's super exciting because it really brings me back to the pure play threat intelligence landscape that I think is really the next thing that businesses need if they don't already have it, which is looking over the horizon at the attacks that are coming at you, the actions of other industries in your vertical that have been attacked, and really getting a good partner in place to help you advise and build a CTI program that adds value. And I'm so lucky to have a number of people, in my sphere of influence. I'm on Twitter @FatHobbit, if you want to follow me. I basically sat down and I figured out, what medium and medium enterprise, IT pros, MSPs, and enterprise can all benefit from a basic to a very advanced cyber threat intelligence program. So my mission, if you will, is to try and bring a lot of great tools that are in use today and add some context to the bad guy activities and try and push that into mid-market at a very effective but very reasonable price. So a daunting challenge. I'm really looking forward to it, and I'm really looking forward to this session because I think the most hilarious part was when Scott said, we're going to do these 7 attack vectors. I'm like, there's not 7 attack vectors. Then we talked for about half an hour, and we came up with about 20 different attack vectors. So what you're getting is sort of a distillation, if you will, of like a great conversation that Scott and I always like to have before we do these sessions to really kind of figure out the direction because, sometimes I get a little bit zany and I go off in different sort of tangents. So always a rehearsal in order to make opening night, as it were, the best night possible.
Yeah, and so along those lines, I do want to quickly send you off on a tangent.
Yes.
What just because you keep up with things, what's got your hair on fire, lately about in sort of the cloud security arena? Just before we get into sort of the thought out 7 things, what should people be aware of?
So there's sort of a good news, bad news. So hair on fire, hair not on fire, hair on fire, hair not on fire. We've been living in this sort of ping pong world for the last little while. So I'll start with the thing that brought me joy. Okay. So 48 hours ago, after a patch was released in August, we had the zero logon vulnerability disclosed along with a proof of concept. Less than 36 hours later, we had the first attacks using that proof of concept. If you're not familiar with what zero logon is, it's a Windows vulnerability that was awarded a CVE score of 10 out of 10, the worst it can be. Now, the good news is most people don't have NetLogon exposed to the internet. If they do, it's a really, really bad day for you, and maybe you need to change the profession. However, this is a lateral movement vulnerability that works perfectly on every domain controller in the world. So although I'm sort of like, and I was quoted in the press and Forbes reached out to me for some quotation, although I'm like, yeah, we need to patch this fairly quickly, it's not as big an emergency as, I think things like WannaCry were. But the good news is, as this was a case where the patch and all of the details and the big deal that the InfoSec press made about it, in that we had the opportunity to interdict it. We had the opportunity to stop this weaponization and these bad guys from exploiting our boxes. And we've had it for nearly a month. So that's the good news. Now, the thing that I think really kind of kicked me back quite a bit was I've been watching a lot of these hacks, and I've been watching a lot of like telemetry on what malicious actors, APT and criminals do to organizations. And I'm seeing a lot of fails, Scott. The recent breakdown that the FBI provided on a unmentioned government agency that was attacked by what appears to be Iranians, although we're not sure, and we're not going to say that they were Iranians, but I really think they're Iranians. And the fact that there were nearly 20 opportunities, yes, 20 opportunities, to detect the activity and to curtail the activity using both really fancy software that we know is available, but also really simple techniques, really easy to implement techniques. And it kind of broke my heart that after all of the hype about ransomware, after all of the guidance that we've been given, the tip of the cybersecurity spear is supposed to be our federal government, and yet there's so much fail in this one instance, like things like being able to make a connection outbound from that network to Finland and transfer a huge amount of data, and that didn't throw any red flags. So I get it. Enterprise networks, government department networks are really big beasts. But it feels like when you got 20 shots at the bad guys and you can't put one on target, we've got a major, major problem that hasn't seemed to advance any more than some of the early days hacks where people were just using bad passwords. So, that's the hair on fire moment, which of course, once it's extinguished, you look around and go, man, it smells bad in here.
Well, let's go to a more pleasant thought. Well, actually, it's not pleasant. It's a more pleasant image, in the console here. But when we were talking, earlier, in our conversation, before this session, you had a really interesting idea, which was that it's sort of a golden hour for people whose job it is to exploit cloud security. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully we're at the golden hour, not the golden minute. But what we're finding is that in the 24/7, always on, always available world that we're living in, exploitation of the cloud happens far more rapidly. The exfiltration of the data and or the amount of services that can be impacted by a malicious actor that gets into the cloud. And so this is really talking about two things. This is talking, and we'll get into specifics, but this is talking about strategy. This is talking about architecture, security controls, and then just, I would say the really unsexy part of cybersecurity and IT about asset management. And if you don't have those things, you kind of are not going to be successful in fending off these attacks that can happen in less than an hour. And I call it the golden hour because it's sort of what doctors and paramedics refer to when they have a traumatic injury. If they can get that person into a hospital or a trauma center within that hour, they have a good chance of that person making it. So, applying that sort of idea that we need to be able to detect things within that time period and respond. And sometimes we have crazy dedicated people that are literally going to jump out of bed at 3 a.m. to look at a log or look at an alert, and go in and deal with it. That actually, maybe I'm in that category because when the organization that I'm working for, Sajax, neglected to tell me that there was a pen test, and I saw a whole bunch of attacks coming in on our corporate network, I crushed the pen tester, reported his IP as malicious, and made a shitstorm out of it, only to find out the next day when IT ops came in that, oh yeah, we were getting pen tested last night. So it happens.
Very nice. Okay, well let's get into now that we've sort of got that background and that setup, let's start talking about what what this session is about, which is top 7 cloud security attack vectors.
Yeah.
So the first one we're going to talk about is insecure endpoints that have access to the cloud. And so what are your thoughts there?
Well, it made my number 1 hit list because of the sudden movement to work from home, the sudden movement to possibly unmanaged infrastructure hitting your cloud infrastructure. And honest to goodness, I think we're actually pretty good with users, okay? But where it gets sticky is our own IT people who have cloud credentials for the organization, and they are maybe being a little bit cavalier, as sometimes IT people do. And if they get popped, well, then it becomes a very, very serious problem indeed. And there are ways to mitigate that we're going to talk about in terms of attack vectors. But I think the important takeaway here is to really understand who those clients are, and if you have to extend licensing in terms of your remote management tool or extend licensing in terms of your EDR or antivirus solution, that's a great thing. But you also have to have those products and services that maybe will be able to detect strangeness going on, right? Like if all of a sudden your American-based small, medium business is seeing a whole bunch of data traffic or a whole bunch of connections from Russia, that might be an indicator that there's a problem. And so really, I think it comes down to having the right logging scheme and awareness going on about the client hygiene that is connecting. And I really like the ideas, especially if the infrastructure can allow it, of locking down cloud so that it only is accessible, for instance, through VPN if it's processing sensitive information, right? Or, for instance, it's containerized in a Citrix type of environment that is patched and updated. I have to stress that part.
Right.
Because there's ways that we can interact with cloud that don't necessarily mean that the workstation itself can interact with the cloud. Techniques like secure web gateways to present services and stuff like that. So really, my plea, if you will, is understand the hygiene of the things that are connecting to the cloud and make sure they're as secure as possible.
Interesting. And have there been, in what you're saying about it being on the, even more of a problem in some ways on the IT side, is something that I haven't heard a lot about. But is that something where have we seen any cases of that? That have sort of splashed relatively big. In the last few months as IT departments headed home and did all their work remotely, or is it more something that like we know is going on, but there hasn't been a big high profile case around it?
So yeah, it's interesting. I've heard many companies complain that they suddenly got a giant Amazon bill, only to find out that their cloud services had been compromised and bad guys spooled up hundreds of instances in that Amazon account to do crypto mining, right, to mine currency. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, there's the really famous time hop data breach, which, again, we'll talk about the single vector of attack there, where a workstation was compromised that had the cloud credentials on it. The bad guys laterally moved up into the cloud and, of course, did what bad guys do, or used to do, which is steal all the things.
Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the next one. And it's interesting because you mentioned, about the movement, to work from home. And so here's another one that's got, a little bit of that element in it as well, the big gaps in end users' knowledge and training.
Yeah, and so this is a big one because like everybody out there is a lot of people are out there are using Office 365, right? And what we noticed cyber criminals are getting very good at is not sending malicious attachments or even malicious links. I think the whole industry is getting pretty good at sandboxing those or filtering those and stuff like that. So the new thing is a couple of different really kind of crazy stuff. And some of it is super old school. So one is pretending to be your Office fax machine or pretending to be the Office voicemail system. And instead of a malicious attachment, what there is an image that when you click on it, links over to what appears to be your Office 365 portal, which then people enter the credentials in to listen to the voicemail, to get the fax message, or to receive the file, right? Now, a lot of this has telltale signs of being a phishing attack, right? And there's a lot of IT security controls that can be thrown in front of that, like DKIM and SPF and domain keys, and just a lot of technology that we can implement that's behind the scenes. But the problem is the raw volume of attacks that are going on we're going to see some things slip through. And it's really interesting that companies that use sort of like an intelligence-led approach to vulnerability management and to educating their workforce find a lot of value in being able to say to the organization, listen, there's these attacks that are showing you a potential voicemail. They are fraudulent. We're doing our best to block them. A few might get through. Please report them through your process. If they do, do not click on the attachment. This is what it does. A little bit of knowledge can go a long way in preventing your users from actually causing a major problem with one of the services that you use. And going back to that federal government that got attacked, once the bad guys had gotten access through Office 365, they moved into the SharePoint environment. And so that all of a sudden, that user now becomes a major problem. They can go through all of those SharePoint documents looking for anything. And in this case, they were looking for help desk tickets that would give them a greater idea about what are some of the systems and data that's available from that access point. So, you know, another big plea here is the actual user's knowledge and training. Please conduct phishing attacks on your organization. Please build a culture of awareness because so many of our services now are in hosted environments.
Right, right. You know, and that makes me wonder about something else, which is, you know, are we seeing sort of an arms race in terms of the tools? You know, when you're talking about like the Office 365 examples and the way it's generating an image and you know, sending people to a logon screen, does that take, you know, fairly sophisticated attackers at this point? Or, you know, like I'm thinking, you know, from a few years ago playing around with a Kali Linux distribution with the social engineering toolkit in it. You know, are there a lot of tools now with, you know, that are updated with Office 365 that anybody can find to put together relatively sophisticated phishing scams, or does it still take a fair amount of expertise?
So there's two things going on there. I mean, anybody can register domains at cheap names, and anybody can use SendGrid to fire phishing emails all over the planet. Okay, so it's really easy to go. But there's two things that you want to do. You really want to build that security awareness culture in your organization through phishing attacks, but also take that intelligence-led so that if you know that there's a campaign coming, which we all know there's going to be a whole bunch of fraudulent UPS campaigns. There always is in the November, December run-up till Christmas, right? Or you missed a package and all of that. So just let your employees know. But I will say this. When you look at Gmail, when you look at Office 365, the amount of effort that they're putting in on the security side, the amount of filtering that they're providing, the tools are there. They haven't made it particularly easy for people to configure it because the vast majority of skill set out there in the environment is Exchange management. And Office 365 is an entirely different beast. In fact, if you ask a person that has been with Microsoft Exchange for 5 or 6 years and is very competent at that, it's very few that can make the quick leap to mastering Office 365 and the myriad of tools that are available to them there. Especially when in the later stages of Exchange development, it became a command line domain. As opposed to a GUI tool domain. So big learning curves, but Microsoft and Gmail and other mail providers are taking it seriously. They're working very hard on it. They're using machine learning and AI to detect this spam. And again, it's out of the billions of spam emails that's sent, all it takes is 10 to reach your enterprise organization, and those 10 can do a lot of damage. So, it's in a volume of attack versus, slipping one into an organization.
A lot of great points there. One last thing I wanted to ask on this topic, which is, what's your view on best practices in terms of how often to conduct training and to send out, your own sort of phishing tests. Because I know a lot of organizations will maybe do it once, they'll have a scare and they'll do it once and then not do it for a few years. But like, how often do users need to be reminded and even sort of shamed by a a test?
So it obviously depends on threat model and risk, right? So if you're handling, if right now you're involved in vaccine development monthly, okay, because you know that there's a huge target and you know everybody wants it. Within an organization, take a risk-based approach, right? Maybe do the call center quarterly, your executives, bi-yearly, your accounts payable, accounts receivable, like vary it up. And the reason you want to do that, Scott, is you don't want it to be predictable. You don't want to phone everybody and say, yep, we're doing a phishing attack this week, because that's not how it works, right? That's like saying that we're going to do a pen test, but we're going to keep everything in the cloud out of scope. And I think I get to rant about that later on. But the number one thing that you can do to make this problem go away, especially from a credential theft, is multi-factor authentication. We'll talk about that in the context of cloud, but in context of the users, listen, they should be using it for banking. They should be using it for Amazon. They should be using it for eBay. If they're not, they're probably going to get burned at some point. So if we can build a culture around multi-factor authentication, I don't want to get into SMS is better than apps or apps are better than SMS. That's not the point, and it's distracting from the message. It's that we're crap at passwords. Passwords were the only technology that we had available. We need to move it up to password management or multi-factor authentication. And that's just where we are today. And people that resist that actively are doing their organization a disservice and have failed to get executive leadership sponsorship in order to start rolling this out. And the quicker organizations do that, a whole bunch of problems go away.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Topic number 3, issues with security groups and access control lists. What do you see in there?
So this is a huge, huge attack surface issue and I have this debate all the time. I get folks telling me, oh, don't worry, we've protected from SSH login with a security group. And I'm like, great. But SSH is still exposed to the entire internet. So now you're relying on potentially password hygiene to protect these assets, and that there isn't an active exploit for that service that you've got hanging off the internet, like a VPN that's unpatched, right? So for me, you need both. You need to control access with security groups for valid or invalid users, right? But you also need to start lowering your attack surface and not having a service that isn't required for the entire global estate exposed globally. It sounds like really simple stuff, and it is, right? But if you decide that, okay, our company's got offices in this place and this place, and I'm going to have users in this place and this place and this place, so I'm going to build an access control list that restricts everything else except for the places that I know my users will be accessing my system from. It eliminates, in a lot of cases, a whole bunch of automated bots. It eliminates the ability of an attack happening from, a low-skilled attack happening from one of our threat actor countries. It just makes a lot of sense, and so many networks are not doing this. And this absolutely breaks my heart. And what would fix this problem is exactly what the federal government department that got owned was, which is for every firewall outbound connection, okay, you have an explicit rule in place that's linked to a change ticket of why that happened, right? But instead, what we're doing is we're getting networks, enterprise networks, that have a whole bunch of stuff hanging out on the internet that you can connect to from Lebanon, right? Or Syria. And anyone, I've got to say, if you don't have business going on there, you should really think about why are we accepting network traffic in the first place from these countries, many of which that are both threat actors and on sanctions lists, where it's technically illegal to be communicating with Iran in a commercial sense anyways. So let's think about that, and let's think about the use of access control lists so that we don't expose our endpoints in the cloud or even our on-premise networks to the entire fury of the entire internet.
You know, and one thing, and maybe it doesn't, but does it make it any more complicated to do that kind of thing now that fewer employees are in offices? Is it still easy enough to control, like if, you know, assuming all your employees have scattered to their homes within your host, you know, your main country, that you're okay, or, you know, with various hops and things, does it get complicated?
So, you know what, it's a technological problem that there is certainly software and services that can solve that. One of the things is if the service is important, it needs to be accessed through VPN, and whether that's MPLS or a VPN tunnel or a point-to-point VPN or a client star VPN, whatever you want to access it with it, but make sure that the connection at the network layer is authenticated, that the user is authenticated, and they are appearing from a whitelisted IP or network range. Right? We don't have to say it's Scott's IP and only Scott can connect to it. We can say everyone in the Midwest or the entire United States can access this, but if you're coming in from overseas, you better be hitting the corporate VPN. We have a lot of flexibility. A risk-based approach is the best one to take, but for God's sakes, let's stop leaving everything hanging out there. And from the client home networking side, forcing the users to go through VPN, if you can, or using some sort of VPN to cloud technology, is probably the safest way to ensure the hygiene of that connection, okay? Because don't forget, what happened at the beginning of COVID was we put a whole bunch of daycares on the corporate network, okay? And those daycares are streaming, those daycares are gaming, those daycares are doing everything. Some of them might be even downloading some particular not great stuff. So we need to look at logs. We need to understand if one of our home users is polluted, is running a botnet. So we need that kind of technology in place. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff was ad hoc. It was done at the last moment. And many organizations found that their network connection could not handle 200 simultaneous VPN users. And it ended in tears.
I love that concept that you've attached. You've included a lot of daycares in your corporate network. It's nicely put.
Thank you.
So, number 4, new and migrated apps that are now in the cloud but not on the organization's security checklist. So you sort of alluded to this earlier. Take this one away.
So probably the people that are most behind in the organization are the risk and audit folks. And this is not, you know, a malicious attack on them, but it's a simple reality of they have a picture of where they were last year. And a lot has happened, a lot of activity. There's probably a digital transformation team in your enterprise that is moving fast, and they're agile, and they're doing all these crazy things and putting all of these services in the cloud and creating new apps. And unfortunately, risk and audit aren't being brought to the table. And when that happens, what they think is going on in the organization in terms of risk and services and exposure doesn't match the reality at all. So this is actually an interesting thing where risk and audit need to be more engaged in the organization to help guide comprehensive reviews of security, right? And also to help organization ensure that these new projects and services don't actually reduce the ability of the organization to be compliant, okay? And this happens all the time because, you know, a marketing department can like buy an email list and they can upload it into MailChimp and they can be firing all of that stuff out there. And unless the organization is comfortable with their risk under GDPR or the CPPA or the California Privacy Act, if they're comfortable with that and they have sign off on that, that's good, because that's their role. But if they don't even know what's going on and suddenly a whole bunch of people make a bunch of complaints, then, it's the marketing VP that's going to be called onto the carpet to answer for this, right? And so I think it's really important to get them to the table and even go so far as to get them attending project management meetings to understand, that digital transformation and what does that mean. It means, well, we're sharing our data with this company. Oh yeah, do we have like a data processing agreement in place with that company? Is there any sort of terms and conditions and paperwork associated with who's underwriting the risk of a disclosure of the third party? All of these questions need to be asked and answered. And it used to be a really easy job, right? You go through checklist. Do we have passwords? Yep, we got passwords. Now it's not. There's a lot of shared risk models that aren't being addressed properly.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really a great point. And I mean, you get into it so much more on the SaaS side, where the IT department isn't necessarily even involved in the purchase decision. It's on somebody 3 tiers down in the marketing department. It's on their personal credit card, and they're expensing it. And there's all kinds of companies. Like, are there any best practices for, getting your arms around all that in order to, include things like the pen test and include things in your security plan overall?
Yeah, this really falls on the shoulders of those VPs, directors, and managers. Train your people to understand the technologies that they're implementing, right? So if there's not anyone that has a security, like a cloud security certification on your security team, and you have a bunch of cloud, dude, like you're not gonna know what the heck is going on with that, right? Nobody would hire a security architect back in the day that didn't understand about, client and DB architecture, right? So why are we in the same position now? And sadly, I think it's because the investment in training isn't being made by these organizations. And that's why we see all of these S3 buckets where security has been turned off in order to make it, quote, work, right? Mm-hmm. But then all of a sudden, terrible things happen, and they were like, yeah, but we delivered that project on time and on budget, and so this is right. The problem. It's de-incentivizing security in the organization. It's a lack of knowledge on the actual implementers. And then, of course, when you look at things like audit and IT security, they may even be behind the curve on that. And that's why, again, IT security needs to be part of the project management office and attend those meetings and understand what's being done to their precious.
Yeah, no, those are great points. And from the other side, it's also it's sort of incumbent upon IT security to become faster and more nimble at assessing, those kinds of things. Just because, people turn to those SaaS applications to get something done that has to get done, and if the security process is so cumbersome that the business can't pivot at the speed that it needs to, it's going to be circumvented.
And I mean, people are always talking about the 80-20 rule, but if 20 out of, that equation is all your security, then, 80 doesn't matter, because 80 is going to get taken away from you, right? So it's equitable sharing of sort of like the vested interest. And this is why I think, risk departments in organizations are becoming very important. Especially as we look at these regulatory climates and stuff like that, and we start seeing misprision by felony charges, for instance, against Joseph Sullivan at Uber for not reporting a data breach and trying to cover up a data breach and getting charged with obstruction of justice. So, there's going to be a big comeuppance for organizations and senior leaders. over this issue, because it is going to expose not just I'm going to say poor practices, right? But it's going to expose them to multi-million-dollar class action lawsuits and potential personal liability, which will fix the problem. And as a famous, somewhat notorious sales channel leader once told me, you fix the people or you fix the people. A little bit ominous there.
Yeah, definitely. All right, let's move on to another fun one. Not based on the label here, but based on the implications. Insecure backups.
Yeah, and by insecure backups, I mean there isn't one in a lot of ways.
Yep.
So agile DevOps and the quick movement of sort of like spooling up services and the whole dynamic nature of SaaS, it seems like the people that say things like, hey, how does this impact business continuity? How does this impact DR and recovery? Aren't at those meetings. And a lot of stuff gets done, and a lot of work and hours and treasures is spent on getting stuff done. But then somebody asks the questions, if it goes up in the cloud, how does it come down from the cloud? And it's interesting. So in a lot of architectures that I've seen where you've got a dev, a staging, and a prod environment, a lot of the folks are basically like, hey, no problem. If prod gets eaten alive, we just roll back to staging and we push again to prod and everything happens. I'm going to say that's great. But if you've got the same passwords and the same infrastructure and somebody gets a hold of your hypervisor for that, you're done, okay? Because they'll delete all your things or encrypt all your things. And then you're doubly done. Because before they delete and encrypt all your things, what they do is they steal all the things. And you've basically given them 2 copies of all your things. So the problem then becomes is that ransomware blackmail issue is what got born out of people that are putting out cloud services, Garmin, right? And I bet you Garmin had backup. I bet you that they had the ability to push from their dev environment into their prod environment, right? I bet you they had that. So that's why the double-ended tactic now of cyber criminals is to steal all your data so that if you don't have backups or you don't have an ability to restore prod, to bypass the ransomware issue, then you pay the ransom. And even if you can put your services back together, you have to pay the ransom because they stole all the sensitive data out of the system. So this is a thing where you really need to engage. And there's one more point I want to make on this because it's an ugly, ugly point. The other group that isn't getting invited to the table here is counsel's office and data management people. Because here's the problem. If you are using a system like Office 365, you probably know what the default retention is. Well, does that default retention match what your corporate policy is of 7 years of data retention? It does not. I will tell you that right now. So you either have a process in place where you PST and you archive everybody's email when they leave the organization. Because imagine, if you will, that a multi-million-dollar lawsuit is dropped a year or so or 2 years after the delivery of a major project, and the corporate counsel comes to the IT people and says, I need to see so-and-so's email from these dates to these dates, and the IT department says, yeah, we don't keep that. We didn't have data retention set up on any of our Exchange servers. So you now have a multi-million-dollar claim being made to your organization and no evidence to refute what is being said about you, right? This is because those people and those use cases are rarely incorporated into the digital transformation and cloud stuff. And a good PM will include those stakeholders and a poor PM will look at this as an IT project. And I think that's the biggest problem right now that I see, is that if you are siloed in an organization, the threat is in between your silos.
That's interesting. Yeah, because we spend a lot of time talking about hybrid cloud and looking at the gaps in between, the different sections of the cloud, different providers and all that. But it's interesting to look at the problem from siloed departments within the company. So the next one is impossible patching cycles, which kind of ties back a little bit to what had your hair on fire and then extinguished the fire in your hair. But what are your thoughts on this?
So it's really interesting. When I started talking about, hey, we just got to roll that patch to all the DC controllers, get some sort of uncomfortable looks. Well, we're not sure if the DC controller will survive a reboot. So there's a problem here, and it's linked kind of to the not having the backup and not having your plan for if things go sideways. But I think one of the things that we've done is we've made it very difficult for enterprise organizations to do comprehensive patching because, A, the tools to do that are very expensive. I mean, I'm not talking about, just using WSUS for your infrastructure. I'm really talking about you need somebody that is very skilled at packaging software. You need somebody that can write scripts. You need somebody that understands how to deploy software and license it properly at the GPO level. But then there's another layer of just knowing what you have. And this is where digital transformation is really difficult if IT and IT security and vulnerability management are at the table, because infrastructure will happen. It's easy, like you said, you whip out your credit card, buy a service, upload a bunch of data, and man, I'm churning through it, right? Putting all of your project management stuff into, the cloud, and then having that person leave the organization only to find that their credit card has been canceled by one department and nobody can access all of the project management stuff anymore, right? It happens.
Yep.
We laugh,
Yep.
but it happens even to very large organizations. So here's the thing. Understanding the impact of bringing all of these services online needs to engage across the organization, because everybody kind of has stake in the game. Everybody needs to understand that there will be downtime. And the biggest thing that I make a big stink about, and this is actually when I'm talking about intelligence-led vulnerability management, is this. If you think patching at the end of a quarter or at the end of the month is a bad idea, is a good idea, go and talk to the sales department, okay? Because they're trying madly to enter in their last orders and to close out the quarter. Or go and talk to the accounting department, who will say, closing on the, patching our boxes and rebooting them with a small chance that they may not come back ever without having to wait hours to restore them, is a risk that the accounting department doesn't want to take. They're nervous already in this COVID era, because guess what they've been doing? They've been staring at spreadsheet after spreadsheet of trying to figure out whether the company will make it through, a lockdown cycle. So they're already pretty amped up, and the last thing you want to do is break all their things. So this is where I'm saying is figure out the times of least risk to your organization, and those are your patching windows, rather than just trying to arbitrarily do it at the end of the month or at the end of the quarter, because they'll choke you out, man.
Yeah. So the last vector for today is the emerging threat of AI, and this is I really wanted to get your take on this one. Because it's something that people talk about a lot. It's our subject today is vectors heading into 2021. But AI is also something where a lot of it is real. There's real progress happening, but then also anything that's vaguely automated gets an AI marketing stamp on it. But what's your take on AI as an attack vector over the next 12 to 15
Well,
months?
I would say that so AI is actually machine learning because, as far as I'm aware, nothing has reached sentience yet, right? It's still learning and it's following man-made patterns, right, or person-made patterns, right? And it's algorithms that we as humans have developed. Okay, so what AI has not done quite yet is invent its own algorithms, and it hasn't reached a full reasoning capacity. And so, of course, there is a danger, and I'm not going to go as far as, like folks like Elon Musk and stuff like that are going to say, that the world will end in a Terminator-like AI holocaust. But a AI that has vulnerabilities that can be led down the wrong path through machine learning, like Microsoft's experiment with Tay, which became a racist spewing bot on Twitter, isn't going to do your brand and your chat bot that greets people coming to your website any particular favors. You know what I'm saying? So I feel like machine learning and AI is important. I think it will provide insight and analysis, and certainly does in more of a static sense, of like data mining and looking for insights and pattern recognition and stuff like that. But I don't see it as an existential threat yet. I do feel that the United States government probably is using things like machine learning and AI to develop exploits and patches for software vulnerabilities. I think there is anecdotal evidence to suggest that some of those may have been used in cyber attacks. But at the same time, I think that we as humans understand that putting AI in charge of things is potentially a very dangerous situation. And I think we as a organization don't want to necessarily put all of the eggs in one basket. But on the other side of the fence, I think there's a lot of opportunity in this space. And, there's always going to be some snake oil and stuff like that. But generally, I would still put, even over the next year, one to watch.
Okay. Fair.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot. We talked about insecure endpoints. We talked about knowledge and training. We talked about security groups and access control lists. We had the making sure that all your cloud apps are within this organization's security checklist. We talked about insecure backups, impossible patching cycles, and then finally AI. Ian, any kind of parting shots and thoughts about the state of hybrid cloud security and the vectors toward it?
Yeah, I think so. There's a bunch of things here. Is like stay educated, look at those, ask for those technical reports on how did things get exploited. I think that's really important from a learning and adapting and understanding risk piece. But I have to say that the biggest thing about cloud and the thing that I think scares off a lot of organizations and leads to digital transformation disasters is really about how difficult it is to price cloud. It seems like everything is an extra. And if you don't know what you need, how can you possibly understand how much you're going to pay? And I think this is the big thing. And so I really think that right now, if you want to make big buku money, if you are a cloud security architect or a digital transformation architect, and you have 3 to 5 years of experience in that, your services are going to be required by just about every organization in every industry vertical on the planet. And I think, if I was to say to the youth of today, being a badass red teamer pen tester seems pretty cool, you'll soon find there's a lot of repetition and it's not particularly challenging, especially once you get good at it. I would say you need to move into more of the cloud security architecture and security realm in order to, in order to grow your career and of course grow the remuneration, because everybody's going to need you. You're going to be like the public affairs guy in the military who's everybody's friend.
Spoken from experience. Well, Ian, thanks so much for joining us today. This has been really interesting and hopefully informative to everybody on the call. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Well, thank you so much, and it's just great to be involved in this kind of thing because, this is the future. Not a whole bunch of people are putting in on-premise infrastructure anymore, and it is going in that direction. It's no longer the year of the cloud. I think it's the decade of the cloud.
Well, on that note, I'm going to just say thanks again, Ian, and I want to thank Nutanix and Citrix for sponsoring us today. And I'm going to turn things over to Tracy before our next break.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you, Ian. That was a great conversation. That was so much information. I really appreciate everything you did there, and I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. So now we're going to go on a short break until the top of the hour. We'll be back at 10 a.m. Pacific for our second session of the day. So everybody hold tight. We'll be right back.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for standing by. Our second session of the summit will resume in approximately 1 minute. We thank you for your patience. Welcome back to session 2 of the summit. Scott, please take it away.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. So it's Scott again to host our second session. We'll be discussing 10 things every IT manager must know about cloud security. So joining us for this session is Howard M. Cohen. Howard is the senior resultant with the Tech Channel Partner Results Group, and he's a regular at our summits. Always provides a wealth of information, delivered with good humor and experience. So he's a 35-plus year executive veteran of the IT industry, and today he writes about IT and the channel. And he's a frequent speaker at IT industry events that include Microsoft Inspire, Citrix Synergy Summit, ConnectWise, IT Nation, Channel Pro Forums, and many, many more. So Howard, always a pleasure to have you on. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome, Scott. Thank you for having me. I'm still trying to think of any sentient human beings I know. What Ian's comment about sentience in AI was really interesting.
Oh, the AI,
but,
yeah.
Yeah, I'm not going to get that esoteric today. I'm going to be a little more pragmatic about, the things that we IT managers ought to know and be very, very conscious of as the cloud becomes everybody's favorite neighborhood, which has been accelerated by the work from home phenomenon. Okay, so we are here today to talk about the 10 things that every IT manager must know about cloud security. Now, the very first one, I'll jump right on into it, is that good news, there is such a thing. There is such a thing as cloud security. Not long ago, 10 years ago, maybe a little more, maybe a little less actually, everybody was afraid that the cloud just isn't secure. I mean, I can't put things in the cloud. They have to stay between my four walls. And nobody stopped to think about the fact that, well, that cable that brings in the internet, it goes right through one of your four walls. And so there goes that. The fact of the matter is that in more recent times, the cloud has become very secure. And as a matter of fact, if you talk to IT managers, 3/4 of them say that they feel the cloud is more secure than their own data center. I actually think that number is low. I've seen bigger numbers in other surveys, but the point is more than 3/4 of IT managers are very confident. Some of the surveys say they sleep better at night because everything's in the cloud. I think that's true, personally. The other thing is that the players, this one too, the players are very big. You're talking about Amazon. You're talking about Microsoft, Google, IBM. These are not small companies. And it's not like any of them have made minor, trivial investments in their cloud business. As a matter of fact, some of them are betting their business on cloud. And they wouldn't dream of letting there be anything less than the best security. As a matter of fact, if you go back a bunch of years, Steve Ballmer, who used to be CEO at Microsoft, got up on stage in front of one of their worldwide conferences and was literally shaking because security had been questioned that year, and they didn't have a good answer right away. So they're very sensitive about security, and they've made huge investments, far more than any of us could make. And you have reason to believe that they're never going to gamble with cloud security. They're never going to gamble on somebody having a really bad episode and having their data compromised. They work very hard to make sure that that happens. Okay, so the first thing to know about cloud security is that it's for real, and it's safe, and it's trustworthy, and it's resilient, and there's all kinds of documentation available if you want to go deeper with that. But let's just say that that hurdle has been cleared. The other thing that you need to know right away about cloud security, you own it. Many people take the attitude that, well, I'm paying for cloud service, and that includes security. They take care of the security. They have the firewalls. They do all the things that are necessary to secure my data. And if something goes wrong, they're the one throat I need to choke. Here's the problem. Who's going to get fired? Be serious about it. Think about it logically. Yes, you can absolutely sue them. You can absolutely, there's no way that you can possibly get remuneration, concomitant with what you lost, but you can't do that. The fact of the matter is, though, that if you're the one who trusted that particular cloud service, well, you're the one who's in hot water, and you're the one who's going to take the hit. So be very serious about it. Be very, very vigilant about it. Make sure that you're inspecting what you expect when it comes to cloud security. Yes, your cloud services will do a great job, but you need to participate as well. Never relax. Just that simple. Never relax. Because there are many, many ways in which even the best cloud security can be breached. And we'll talk a little bit about that too. Again, from a strategic standpoint, the next thing that you need to know, and that a lot of people don't seem to know, you've got compliance, you've got security. Many people think that it's the same thing. They're both the same thing, right? Well, no, they're not. Compliance and security are two completely different things. You can be fully compliant with whatever regulations your company is subject to, fully compliant, doing everything you're supposed to do, passing every audit, and yet you can get hacked in a heartbeat because you're not fully secure. Flip side, you can be unbelievably secure. You can be overspending your security budget by tons, and yet you're not fully compliant because compliance comprises a lot of things. It's not just data security. Compliance usually includes processes and policies and procedures that people have to execute on, and they have to document that. So it's more than just digital security. It's the activities of people, it's the policies and whether or not they're being followed. And if they're being followed, is that being documented? Are you adhering to the standards you set? Do you know what your risks are, and have you put in place risk mitigation strategies? There's a lot, and that's a completely different science than security, where we're worrying about packets getting through the firewall or data being stolen from anywhere, or a user or somebody pretending to be a user and it's not really them. Very, very different set of concerns, very different set of procedures and processes. There's really no resemblance. So you really need two separate teams. You need one team that focuses on compliance and all the things that it takes to be and stay compliant. You need another team to focus on security. Don't try to put them. It's kind of like going from playing racquetball to playing tennis. Yes, you're hitting a ball, but the racket is completely different, and one set of skills will completely throw you for the other. That was a strange sports analogy. Okay. Next few rules are going to all be around the theme of beginning with the end in mind. Now, those of you who recognize that phrase have probably read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by the great writer Stephen R. Covey. Unfortunately, this is not all 7 rules. It's just this one, beginning with the end in mind. And in this case, I'm not talking about what it is you need to achieve. I'm really talking about endpoints. Begin with the endpoints in mind. So I'm talking about your handhelds and your laptops and your tablets and your, people are trying to say, these are trivial. Who cares about these? They're just computers. What? The fact of the matter is they are the most vulnerable point in your cloud system. They are the way in which you access the cloud system. They are the first step along the fabled ISO OSI 7-layer model. The user connects at the application layer, and that's running on one of these. And so you have to be very, very careful that these are properly configured. They have the proper security software, proper policies applied. You really need to be very circumspect about how well your endpoints are configured. Also, while we're talking about endpoints, this is an acronym. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this acronym, PEBCAC. Very important, something that every network engineer knows, and they are very hesitant to share with their users because it stands for problem existing between keyboard and chair. We're talking about the end user. Okay, this is by far, according to any network engineer I've ever spoken with, the hardest segment of the network to manage. It is absolutely, they are absolutely a part of your cloud system. Rumors are that they are sentient, that they do have sentience, and I don't particularly necessarily believe that's true of all of them, but it's probably true of them sooner than it is of the AI that they're using. Users can be fooled. In all seriousness, users can be fooled. Users can be hoodwinked. When we talk about social engineering, okay, the fact is that the number one security threat to all of IT these days is phishing, which leads to ransomware. Those of you who are not familiar, I'm pretty sure all of you are, but just to be sure, phishing happens when a user receives an email that for all intents and purposes looks genuine. It looks like it comes from their bank, or it looks like it comes from a retail organization, or some company, some brand that they know well. And the colors, the color palette looks exactly right. The logo, it's exactly their logo. The typography, everything about the email looks real, looks genuine. However, it's not. It has been sent by somebody else, and sometimes if you look really carefully at the URL, the web address, you'll notice that it's not exactly what it says. It like the word Columbia, right? Everybody names their company Columbia. It's a very recognizable name. So you have the Columbia Broadcasting System, Columbia Sportswear, Columbia Bicycle. Well, if you took the O in Columbia and turned it into a 0, or even better, took the L in Columbia, turned it into a 1, most people wouldn't catch that. They wouldn't notice that you've messed with the URL. And they would say, oh, it wants me to click this link to gain access to a terrific new resource. I'll click that link. Or it says, open this attachment here, fill it out, send it back, and let us begin the process of making your life more wonderful. And tons of people fall for that. They click on the link or they open the attachment, and all hell breaks loose. All of a sudden, they get a notification that their data is gone, or it's corrupted, or it's been encrypted and they don't have the keys. Something terrible has happened to their data. But good news, if you pay this ransom to this dark website, we'll give you back your data. Now, that's a tough spot to be in now, isn't it? That is also career altering. How do I deal with this? The attackers themselves have been very, very resolute and very intelligent about it. Reports are that the ransoms that they're requesting or demanding have gotten lower, dramatically lower. Now, why would they get lower? Well, they get lower because more people pay them when they're lower. And they found that they made more money by having a low ransom than a high ransom. So this is the level of intelligence that we're dealing with. People who are really astute about how to make things happen, how to fool people, how to engineer their existence and their experience. So the user, don't give short shrift to the user. Train your users. Support your users. Don't think that just because you gave them training that the training is enough. The fact of the matter is that the training is never enough. Absolutely never. You've got to keep coming back to the training. You've got to keep coming back to it. The other thing, let's just push that aside for a second. Let's protect your budget. Yeah. Users are the biggest exposure you have when it comes to your budget. Why? Well, now they're using services that you pay for based on consumption. So you pay only for what you use. Doesn't that sound great? Aren't you enthusiastic about that? You only have to pay for the services that you use between the time that you request them and the time that you release them on your self-service portal. Well, who's using that self-service portal? It's the user. And so a lot of users request a resource that they need. Maybe it's more storage for a project. Maybe it's more memory for just a big number crunch they've got to do, more processor power for that. They request more resources. They get them. They use them. They do a terrific job. They go home. What they leave out, they didn't release them. And they come in the next day and they still don't release them. And weeks or months later, they still haven't released those resources, which you are now paying for, even though they're not being used. Now, no other segment of your network is going to do that, but a user does. I'm not even going to say user can. Users do, plenty of them. And so you've got to be constantly monitoring all of your ghostly resources, the resources that are sitting there unused for periods of time. Stay on top of those and get back to those users and make those users miserable, please, because that's a good way to encourage them to not repeat that behavior. It's a big exposure. It may be the biggest cost factor exposure you have of all the exposures we're going to talk about here today. So the problem exists between the keyboard and the back of the chair. That's the user. Lots of things to watch out for there. Here's the next one. When you're dealing with any endpoint that's connecting to anything, not just a cloud, really any system, but most specifically when you're dealing with cloud resources, multi-factor authentication is imperative. It's required. You can't do without it. Just kind of embrace that idea that you can't do without it. It's not an option. It's the only way to do it. Why? Multi-factor authentication combines several different ways of protecting your network system and the cloud that you're connected to. So when somebody goes to log in to use that cloud system, they need to have something with them. Nowadays, it's their mobile phone. Those of you who have been around long enough remember the key fobs, right? Everybody had a key fob. And when you went to log in, you clicked a button and it gave you a 6-digit number. And after you put in your password, you put in that 6-digit number. Well, good news, you don't need the key fob anymore. Now we can do that with your mobile phone. And you'll see a request that you look at your mobile phone, get the 6-digit number or 4-digit number in some cases, sometimes more. And after you've put in your password, please enter that 6-digit number here. And that may let you through. Okay. Some are now adding yet a third layer, which is something that you are. You've got the phone that you have. You've got the password that you know. And by the way, please update your passwords regularly. Force those rules. They're good rules because 80% of passwords in use today are anywhere from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to the word password itself to a spouse's name or a pet's name. If you look at all passwords in use, 80% fall into one of those categories, which is horrifying. And the other 20%, by the way, have been written on a Post-it note stuck under the keyboard. So people are really not taking their passwords terribly seriously. And that means that you need other factors. That's one of the reasons for multi-factor. Passwords have been so vulnerable for so long. But if you're combining a character, at least one character, at least one capital letter, one lowercase letter, and one number in at least 12 digits or 8 digits at least, you're getting a stronger password, and you're improving the level of security they provide. It's never going to be enough. Passwords alone, never going to be enough. So now we're finally adding something that you are. It may be your fingerprint. It may be your face. There's a lot of mobile phones now that use Face ID. It's quick. It just looks at you, you look at it, and it lets you in, and boom, you're done. Nothing more need to be said. Your face is hard to fake. It just is. So that's a good way to do it. Retina scan, a la NCIS, not as widely in use in the commercial market, but who knows? That may be what's coming next. So combine something you have with something you know and something that you are. Somebody once said to me that he writes his passwords on the back of his hand. And I said, well, what happens if your hand gets cut off? You've lost your password. And he made the good point that if my hand gets cut off, I've got bigger problems than worrying about getting on the network. So something you have, something you are, and something you know. Now, one of our sponsors today is the bona fide inventor of virtualized desktop infrastructure. They didn't call it that back then. They called it client-server computing, thin client computing. They had a lot of names for it. But today, VDI is very popular for people who are accessing the cloud. Let me explain why. Your data is your most precious resource. It is by far the most valuable resource that you own. Scott will tell you that in our last presentation, I pointed out that data is the new bacon or the new oil. It's the most valuable thing people own, the thing they love the best. And when you have corporate data sitting on like a mobile phone, if you're doing the BYOD thing and people are bringing their own device, and even if they're not, if they're using their corporate device, you can be guaranteed They have their personal email on there. They have personal data on there. And now their personal stuff mingles with your corporate stuff. Nothing breaks your psyche faster than mingling your personal stuff with your corporate stuff. So the original strategy for that was compartmentalization. Basically, you created a compartment that only contained the corporate data and another compartment containerization, a container that only contained your personal data. Personal on one side, corporate on the other, and a firewall in between. And unfortunately, lots of problems. Not easy to configure, not easy to maintain, and all too easy to break. And so you found users sending corporate data using their personal email, which is completely in violation of just about any security policy, including, of course, government security policies, that anybody has ever seen. So containers, they can work, but they're very difficult, and they're very not necessarily all that terribly reliable. VDI is a completely different story. Okay, VDI, the data never gets to the device. For those of you who are not familiar with it, the actual software is running on a computer in the data center. So the application's running there, the data is being processed there. It never goes across the wire. The only thing that goes across the wire or wireless connection out to the mobile user is the appearance of the screen, the key clicks, the mouse movements, or the touches on the screen. Anything that's a user activity, those transit the cable. The screen appearance transits the cable, and maybe audio transits the cable. But none of it is ever recorded on the device. It's just displayed on the device. So it's just an experience. It's just an interface. It is not a data conveyance. This is very powerful. Because the data is not there, nobody can get to your data, at least not on your remote device. Typically, that protocol doesn't provide the ability for people to tunnel back into your cloud system. So that's very protective as well. The other benefit that you get out of VDI is that it's much faster, right? Think about it. Which is going to be faster? Transmitting the entire database down the wire so it can be processed at the endpoint device, or just sending the screen appearance? Obviously, the screen appearance is it's a fraction of the data. And so it transits very quickly, and many users cannot necessarily tell the difference between being on a local connection, on a local area network, or being halfway around the world on a mobile phone, a remote connection. It's not the same thing. The data is not flowing, but it's the same experience. It's exactly the same experience. So it's in many respects, it's the preferable way to connect users to the resources that they use from the cloud. Okay. What's the downside of VDI? There are two. The first one is cost. It's pretty expensive. There's a lot involved. You need servers. You need storage. You need routers and switches. You need all the equipment. This is going to be an on-premise reality. So you're making capital investments in all that equipment. The other problem is it's complex. Configuring VDI is not a trivial activity. It just isn't. It's very sophisticated. It's very complex. There's a lot of people who command very high salaries because they're expert at VDI. It's one of those skill sets. And a lot of people just couldn't justify paying for all of that, paying for all the equipment, paying for all the software, paying for all the licenses that are required, the client access licenses, the CALs. It's a lot. So what do we do? Well, we're here talking about security in the cloud. Obviously, VDI is not. It is not in the cloud. Well, somebody said, well, gee, why don't we just take VDI and move it to the cloud? And they started calling it desktop as a service. DAS, desktop as a service. Now, you've got all the benefits. You've got the screen appearance transiting to and from the remote user, no data leaving the data center. It all stays safely tucked away behind firewalls and all kinds of other protection. It's much safer. There's no containers being built and breaking, no compartmentalization of data. There's also, by the way, no responsibility, no accountability for data. One of the big problems people ran into using both of these strategies, both DAS and VDI, was that if, God forbid, somebody lost their device, well, the strategy then is to brick the device, right? Send a signal out that makes it erase itself. The problem is if you do that as a corporate entity, you're erasing that person's personal private data. And you may not have permission to do that. And you may find your employees suing you for destroying their data, especially if they recover the device suddenly after that happens. So nobody really ended up wanting to do containers. Nobody wanted to have to manage corporate and personal data on any device. They wanted just corporate data or just personal data. It's fine by them if you have personal data on your device, as long as you don't have corporate mixed in. DAS does that. DAS does not put any corporate data out onto the device, so you don't have to worry about that. This is the strategy that a lot of people are turning to when they're using the internet. Okay, just bear with me for 1 second because I feel like we skipped a slide. And I've been having a little technical problem here. I guess we didn't. Okay, good. The next thing I want to talk about is SASE. And for those of you who are freelance writers like me, I am not talking about a self-addressed stamped envelope. No, I am talking about Secure Access Service Edge. Secure Access Service Edge. And Secure Access Service Edge is a logical outgrowth of where we've been going for the past several years, really. It combines network and security and cloud. So nothing is on-prem. Absolutely nothing. There's no footprint on-prem at all. Computing becomes completely independent from your premise or wherever your premises may be. It's granular. So you've got, all of the things that you would expect on the network side. You've got SD-WAN capability, content delivery networks, distribution networks. You've got bandwidth aggregation, WAN optimization, all the things you see listed there, the things that you would expect in a network management schema. But then you've also got a group of security protocols that will help you with that. Now, obviously, there's just fundamental network security. But then there's the Cloud Access Security Broker, which it's cloud-based, and it sits between the users and the applications, making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing and that all policies are being observed. It's a broker for security policies. There's Secure Web Gateway, which is protecting users from any, certainly from phishing and ransomware, but from many different ways in which a website can attack the user or attack the user's data. The next one I love, ZTNA, Zero Trust Network Access. It's becoming the preferred replacement for VPN. Most recently, when we all went home because of the pandemic, everybody saw what they expected to see. VPNs couldn't scale. They were collapsing left and right. And users were being disappointed left and right. They needed an alternate. And there was an alternate available, which is Zero Trust Network Access, where nothing happens until the user is authenticated and the device is authenticated. So Zero Trust Network Access is embodied into SASE in the cloud. Again, no on-premise involvement. The next one is a mouthful: web application and API protection. Because most of what you're using are going to be web applications in this framework, and a lot of things are going to depend upon one application being able to interact clearly, cleanly, and effortlessly with another. You have to worry about the applications and the application program interfaces. They need to be protected so nobody can use them to invade and get at your data. And so this is where we get web application and API protection as a service. It's kind of a natural that the firewall is also going to be in the cloud. So firewall as a service is part of SASE. RBI was created by the Reserve Bank of India as a set of protocols specifically for banking, and it was named after them. So RBI stands for Reserve Bank of India. It is a complete protocol set specifically for the banking environment, and it's embraced in there. And then finally, the last piece of SASE that's available here is domain name service protection, protecting your DNS access so that, again, nobody can spoof the name, nobody can spoof the IP address. You know, it's really much safer than it has been. Okay, so SASE is already rolling out. You're going to see more and more of it. One of the things I wanted to make sure I pointed out was that with SD-WAN especially, SASE becomes so logical. SD-WAN is using multiple different kinds of carrier to achieve what it achieves. And of course, with each different kind of MPLS, for example, there's going to be different security protocols available. You need to be able to manage them and how they interact. That's what SASE is really about. And of course, SD-WAN is our opportunity in many respects to bypass the cloud for specific applications. And so in the future, as latency becomes more and more of an issue and has to be completely removed, there may be many applications in which you simply have to skirt the cloud until somebody figures out how to get the latency out of the internet, which is probably never going to happen. So there again, SD-WAN. Which brings us to the 10th rule. And this is what I call the last layer of defense. And that is that data must be encrypted. Now, everybody encrypts data in transit. Your firewall encrypts data. Everything encrypts data in transit. So it can't be intercepted. But it also has to be encrypted at rest when it's sitting in storage. And here's why. The first reason why it can best be illustrated when we talk about multi-tenant environments. One of the things that made the cloud so less expensive, so cost-effective, is that many, many clients, many, many tenants can share the same server. You could have 50, 100, or more tenants, each using a separate VM on the same physical server box, each paying a fraction of what it costs to operate that box, and yet the provider is making a clear profit. Everybody wins. Everybody is afraid that, just like your neighbor upstairs in your apartment building, their bathtub may leak and drip into your apartment. They're afraid that data may leak and drip into somebody else's VM. Maybe on purpose. Now, as far as I can tell, and if you know any differently, please let me know, because I'd love to see it. I've never found a report of data leakage between VMs in a VM server, ever. Nobody's ever done it. And yet everybody's concerned about it. And so you want to protect against it. The easiest way to protect against it is to encrypt your data. Then if somebody does get at it, if they break in and get at it, or if they manage to siphon it from one VM to another somehow, they get gibberish. If they don't have the encryption key, what they end up with is completely useless to them. Completely useless. So encrypting the data is a good thing in terms of protecting yourself against hackers who may be able to get into the cloud and may be able to get at your server instance and your storage and get at your data. But it's also great protection against perhaps the biggest hacker of all, and that, of course, is the government. If the government subpoenas your data from your cloud provider, they will give it to them instantly, without reservation, without hesitation, and without notification. They won't notify you. You want to go back and look in your own contract. Your contract with your cloud provider specifically states this, that if they receive a subpoena, they're going to comply with it. That's it. They're not going to fight your battle. Knowing that, a couple of things you've got to be very conscious of. Number one, encrypt your data. Because now if the government gets it, they get gibberish. They give us enough gibberish. Why not give them some back? So they get gibberish. And that's good, right? As long as they don't have the encryption key. Now, some of you are probably thinking, oh, well, let's just go to the cloud provider and get the encryption key. What's the problem? The challenge there is don't give your cloud provider, ever give your cloud provider an encryption key. They don't need it. They have no use for it. They have no business dealing in any way, shape, or form with your data payload. Yes, they're concerned with the packets. Yes, they're concerned with the traffic. Yes, they're concerned with the storage, but they have no concern with your data payload. So never, ever, ever share your encryption key with your cloud provider. That's the good news. The bad news, the government will then come and subpoena you for the encryption key, and you do have to comply. You have to give it up. The upside, of course, is now you know that they have appropriated your data. Now you know they have it, and now you can engage legal representation to try to protect you against it. So it's a big benefit. Always encrypt all data in the cloud, whether it's sitting in cloud storage or transiting over transport from cloud to you, to others, and so forth. Always encrypt your data. All right, so we've gone through the 10 things you must know. There's the illustration. Encrypt, encrypt, encrypt. There is a paradigm shift that all of this suggests you have to go through. And it's one I hope you'll visualize every time you're applying what you've always known to your life in the cloud, because they're different. And here's the biggest way in which they're different. On the one side, in a network schema, like the cloud, but in the on-prem network schema, you're used to having a core. And in the network core, you have your servers, you have your storage, you have all the equipment, the routers and switches, the power conditioning, everything that it takes to run a data center is at the core. And so you manage that with core management techniques. The other part of the other component of your network is the edge, okay? And on the edge are all the end user devices. And by the way, talking about end user devices, if you think you've got a lot to manage today, consider the Internet of Things. You're going to have billions upon billions of devices that you're concerned about. In your case, maybe just millions and millions, just millions and millions. We've had more things on the Internet than people since 2008, according to Cisco. And it's just ramping up. It's doubled in size over the past 5 years. It's expected to go at least double and a half, almost triple, between now and the next 5 years. So a proliferation of devices that just makes your management in the cloud that much more difficult. You have to manage the protocols, the security, the cost. I mean, It's going to be huge. Here's the thing. When you talk about the cloud, this paradigm goes away. Instead of having a core, there are thousands of cores. Every cloud service you subscribe to is being run in a cloud data center that is a core unto itself. Okay, you have to worry about each of those cores. Each of those cores have their own security schema. They have their own protocols. They have their own policies. You have to make sure they all work together and play nicely together. That's not easy. Okay, cloud engineering is the next great science. For those who have been systems engineers and network engineers, many are transitioning to becoming cloud engineers because it is just as sophisticated to make these cloud services work together as it's ever been to make applications in a network run together. Tons of cores all over the place. Now, where do you think the edge is? And the right answer is the entire world. The planet has now become the edge of your network. You may have users anywhere. Right now, companies that had everybody in one building have everybody in dozens upon, maybe hundreds of buildings called their homes. And each home, they're connecting via a residential internet service, which you have no way of knowing how good their security is, but you're concerned about it because your users are using it. You have to protect it. You have to secure it. This is by no means easy. And as long as this pandemic keeps people working at home, and now that people are finding out working at home is terrific, is more productive, you can bet it's going to continue. You as an IT manager have to worry about every residential connection, every device that they're using, and whether or not it's sufficiently configured with security to be able to access your network. There's lots more to worry about. Your threat landscape just increased in size by orders of magnitude. So if that doesn't cheer you up, I don't know what will, but that really is the thought that I wanted to leave you with. You're in a much bigger playground now. You've got dozens upon dozens of cores or more that each of you is dealing with, and you've got a global edge that you have to be concerned about. Once you make that paradigm shift, it becomes easier to think through these things, visualize them, and figure out what you really need to do about them. The good news is that all the best manufacturing minds in the world are coming up with tools and platforms to help you. Two of them helped sponsor this session today. With that, I'd like to bring Scott back if we have any questions.
Yeah, great, Howard. Good stuff. And if you have any questions, go ahead and type those in. But I guess the first thing I'll say is, just from coming over the, comments coming over the console here, the PEBKAC or PEBKAC reference was a hit. Raymond says, LOL, I use that all the time. And Eric says, LOL, we called it a 1224 error with the issue existing 12 to 24 inches from the screen. So, and some of
if that's the case, it's a good thing I didn't do the ID10T error. For those of you who don't know the ID10T error, just write that out in front of you in digits, ID10T, and you'll see exactly what it refers to. Sorry.
Yeah, no, there's also the IBM error, idiot behind machine error, layer 8 issues for networking geeks, wetware bugs, carbon-based error. There's all kinds of fun ones. So you mentioned SASE. That seems really important. So is that software? Is it an appliance or a cloud service, or is it a set of infrastructure pieces? I mean, what is it in terms of product?
It's a combination of infrastructure pieces, certain hardware components, running specific software. But realistically, the software is all pretty much running in the cloud. The only thing you need on-prem is an endpoint device to manage it. They're all protocols, and it's a protocol suite that has been brought together. There are several providers now. I expect some of them that are near and dear to us will be embracing SASE very shortly. It's a natural outgrowth, if you think about it, of the transition from on-prem to cloud. Once you've done it, you really want to move everything. I mean, you don't want to leave. Why would you have a firewall on-prem if everything's in the cloud? It just makes sense. So it's a protocol suite. That's probably the best way to characterize it.
Protocol suite. Okay, that's perfect. Hey, we had another question that came in, and this is kind of a cultural question. And you've got a lot of experience dealing with business, sort of even above the IT department. Mm. The question is about how to prioritize cloud security, and I think it was more about how to make upper management understand the importance of cloud security. Any tips there?
Well, the first thing that occurs is the thought about your data. If you want a CFO, certainly, to appreciate the importance of cloud security, ask them how they would feel about their biggest competitor gaining access to their customer data or their design data or any of their other major premier data assets. That's something you never want to have happen. When you come down to it, and we've said this forever, it's all about the data. The data, everything centers around the data. And so the importance of security, appreciating it, is absolutely appreciating the value of your data. And that's how I've always approached it and always counsel others to approach it.
Good advice. And I guess the last thing I'll ask you is, you went through, 10 tips here, these 10 things that, IT managers should know about cloud security. All of it was good stuff. But, as you look ahead to 2021, is there one that stands out as something for people to really consider, or, that it's important? Maybe its importance is sort of observed in the breach. Anything you really want to call out?
Yeah, one thing that I didn't really touch upon, and I wish I had, and it's related but not necessarily directly. We're operating to a deadline. That is to say that at some given point, for those of you who are familiar with IP addressing, IP addressing is, every device has an IP address. Those of you who have home routers, you've seen 192.168.0.1, and that's the address for your home router. Given that those addresses are based on a 32-bit word, you can only have 4.3 billion of them. Sounds like a lot. It's not. We ran out of them years ago. I mean, years ago. And all kinds of strategies have been put into place to get around that, including the fact that your home routers all have this fake set of IP addresses behind the firewall. That's only going to go so far. As we go forward, we talked about the billions of devices that are being added to the internet every day. We talk about how, VMs in a server. If you have 100 VMs in a server, you need some multiple of 100 IP addresses for that server. When you think about all the vehicles that are using internet service now, they're going to need IP addresses, especially if they're driverless. They're definitely going to need IP addresses so that they're individually identified. Your home appliances, your home theater systems, your toaster oven, everything is going to have an IP address. And so we've already run out of them. What are we going to do? And the answer is we're going to move from IPv4, which is the addressing schema that we've been under since the beginning. And we're going to move to IPv6. And IPv6, instead of being based on a 32-bit word, is based on a 128-bit word, much bigger. And instead of having 4.3 billion, we're going to have 304 undecillion available addresses. Now, if you want to visualize 304 undecillion, just stick 36 zeros after the number 304, or 38 zeros, and just try to conceptualize how many that is. To me, it's an unfathomable number. So it's unlikely that we will ever run out, but 128 is easily 4 times more complex than 32. And that complexity is going to plague us. First, we're going to have to move from 32 to a hybrid and service both. And then we're going to have to move from that hybrid over finally to full IPv6, and IPv4 will go away. We're operating under a deadline. That has to be completed according to the Internet Engineering Task Force. It has to be completed by April of 2011. That was the deadline they set for that transition. Obviously, we're a little late. The fact of the matter is that inevitably, we're going to have to do something about it. And when we do, it's going to be a major project. It's going to be 2 major projects. First the hybrid, and then finally the move across. This is not simple. And it's going to take, if you think migrating from one version of an operating system to another is complex, if you think that migrating from on-prem to cloud was complex, that's nothing. That's child's play compared to changing your addressing word. It's a completely different level of complexity. And people need to start getting prepared for it.
That sounds like a topic for a whole other webcast. So
sorry,
we'll put a pin in that one.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to have to leave it there. So thanks so much for all the information in this webcast. This was great stuff.
Well, thank you, Scott. Always a pleasure.
Likewise. So in addition to thanking Howard, I want to thank Citrix and Nutanix for making today's event possible, which we're about to go on a short break before the third and final session. So let me turn things over to Tracy to set that up.
Okay, great. So thank you, Scott and Howard. A great discussion, great presentation. I always enjoy Howard's presentations. And as Scott said, now we're going to go on our final break till the top of the hour. So we'll be back at 11 a.m. Pacific for our third and final session. In the meantime, resources provided by our sponsors are on the console, as well as a PDF of the presentations. And we will let you know when the replay is available. So with that, we'll be right back. Please hold on. Thank you so much.
Welcome back to session 3 of the summit. Scott, take it away.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and welcome back, everyone, and thanks for staying on the call. It's Scott Becker again from Redmond Magazine and Virtualization and Cloud Review. So the title of this session is Expert Best Practices for Hardening Your Enterprise Hybrid Cloud Infrastructure. And for this next hour, I'm going to be talking with John O'Neill Sr. about best practices, tips, tricks, and traps in hybrid cloud security. So John is the chief technologist for AWS Solutions. And during his more than 20 years in IT, he's worked as a consultant, an architect, an executive, a speaker, and an author. He's been involved in multinational networking, messaging, and communications projects. He's written material for Thomson Reuters, Aspetore Books, and Exec Blueprints. And he develops courseware for Pluralsight. John often speaks at IT events such as our Tech Mentor Cloud and Virtualization Live 360 or Cloud and Virtualization Live shows and our Live 360 show. He's also been honored as a multi-year Microsoft MVP. So we're in great shape with John today. John, welcome to the call.
Hey, Scott, it's always great to be here. Thanks for inviting me along.
My pleasure. Yeah, and so one thing I want to mention is this is a conversational session, to kind of wrap up the day. So we're really leveraging, John, your unique mix of consulting expertise and technical knowledge. But, to the audience, if you've got questions, the session is a great one to get them answered. And in fact, we've already got some worked in. A lot of you filled in questions when you were registering for the conference. So a lot of those are built into this session here. But John, just as we get started here, it might be a good place to talk about, have you come across any challenges recently in your professional work involving hybrid cloud infrastructure?
Well, unfortunately, I couldn't almost schedule it this way if I tried, but most of my morning today was spent responding to a ransomware event at a major medical provider. So,
oh, no.
and medical system, right, which involves a lot of hybrid type infrastructure scenarios. And, it really just reinforces the notion that it doesn't really matter what type of organization you have, whether it be for-profit, not-for-profit, education, government, private, whatever. You are not immune from attackers. And, just like there will always be spam, there will always be junk mail as long as there's a mail service, there will always be those who try and take advantage of others. And, we have to face that threat. And, that's what I'm excited to get in and really dive deeper in and talk about here in this session. And I really need to get you an updated bio where I don't sound so boring.
Okay, I didn't find it that boring, but if you've got spicier stuff to throw in there, we'll take it. So you talked a little bit about hybrid cloud infrastructure, and obviously that's our topic today. But I was thinking it might be good to set the stage, just sort of nail down exactly what we're talking about with hybrid cloud infrastructure. So when you use that term, what are you thinking about?
And it's always great to start with this definition, right? Because cloud is almost like internet in that every person has a little different perspective, so they describe it a little different way. Often they mean the same thing at the end of the day, but the vernacular can change. So to frame our conversation, it's great that we understand kind of where my perspective comes from on that. And I define infrastructure as all the necessary IT pieces and parts that empower an organization to deliver on its mission, okay? And notice I said the IT pieces and parts because, there's IT is just one cog in the wheel that an organization uses, but IT is no longer just a necessary evil. I believe IT is a strategic resource for every organization, and our infrastructure is what allows us to deliver on that. And when we talk about hybrid cloud, we're really talking about not just those pieces and parts that are located within our physical structures, our buildings and offices and those places, but also those that are located in places that we may not even know the physical location of, right? When I run things from Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure, I don't necessarily know where the specific storage or the specific server is exactly located, you know, what building, what rack, what floor, all those kind of things. But I also don't care. That's the definition of cloud to me. So when I talk about hybrid cloud infrastructure, I'm talking about all those necessary IT pieces and parts, regardless of where they are.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great definition. And basically, it's everything that IT is concerned with, essentially.
You got it. And, you know, back in the day, we used to try and divide infrastructure from software, and we'd say, okay, well, the infrastructure is the layer one cabling and the network switches and the routers and the firewalls. But I believe now, in the cloud era and the hybrid environments, we're really talking about all the bits and pieces. So I include in that, you know, IaaS, so infrastructure as a service, PaaS, platform as a service, even software as a service, which is kind of where cloud started for most people back in the day.
Yeah. So what are some of the basic issues with securing that hybrid cloud infrastructure? And when I say basic issues, I guess in a lot of ways I mean a hybrid cloud as opposed to, you know, sort of more traditional security, you know, concerns back before there was a hybrid cloud.
I would say kind of keeping it at a general level for this part of our conversation, I would describe it as difficulty in understanding where the attack vectors are, right? So what are we protecting and how are we protecting it? We've become so entrenched and so methodical in the security approaches that we've taken in our data centers over the years that we either don't expand that thinking to include off-premise or conceptualized resources, or we don't even go there. We don't even look at, hey, I have containers in the cloud, or I have storage in the cloud, and I have these kind of things. What can I do? The other thing is that the threats we're facing today aren't the same threats we faced yesterday. So you can't use the same protection, right? You have to constantly evolve your security skills, your position, your stance. And one thing that I always say in just about every IT session I ever do, whether it's focused on security or not, is if you work in IT today and nobody has told you that you're an IT security professional, well then, let me be the first to welcome you to the IT security professional career, because you're in it. You just don't know it yet. And I'm letting you, because every one of us, whether we're in software, whether we're in networking, whether we're in management, we play a part in protecting our organizations and keeping them safe.
Great point. So let's get into some best practices. You know, and if there were a top best practice for securing hybrid cloud infrastructure that you could recommend to somebody, what would that be?
So my number one best practice right now, when it comes to hybrid cloud infrastructure, is stop thinking about it as two different things and as one whole. And let me dive a little deeper in that. What I mean by that is it's not the cloud is your neighbor's yard and my on-prem is my yard and I have a fence between them and I have some gates and we call that. The reality is we're using the collective set of resources to deliver on our mission, which really means that the neighbor's yard and my yard are now one big, holistic space for, hosting the block party that we want to host or whatever it is. And that may be a bad analogy, but the concept is sound in that you need to understand that, particularly now. For years, I talked about mobile and the access anything from anywhere kind of approach. Well, now it's I just call it whatever, whenever, from wherever, because every day we're being asked to connect somebody to something else from somewhere else because they're working from home, or they're a vendor that can't travel to our state, or any of those types of things. And if we look at our on-prem and our cloud infrastructure as two separate things, what I've found is it becomes very easy to miss a hole, if you know what I mean, right? You're the security guard in charge of locking up all the doors in the building, and you walk around and you get 99% of them, but you leave that one open, and it's just a matter of time before somebody finds it and gets in. Same kind of deal here. Whereas if you treat it all as one and you look at every single one, then it's not so much of a problem. So my number one best practice is understand your holistic infrastructure environment, and that's both cloud and on-prem, and even other private clouds that you may have integrated, such as partners or other stakeholders.
So that's really interesting. Let's dig into that a little bit. This whole idea of understanding it all as a unified whole. Any tips for how to do that?
So one of the biggest, or I should say one of the most commonly exploited areas I see right now has to do around identity. So, making sure that someone is who they say they are, they have, authenticated properly and been authorized properly. And, a big part of not falling down that or falling off that cliff is making sure that, one, you have your identity management system unified throughout your hybrid infrastructure. So don't use a bunch of different identity platforms. Use one and get it synchronized, federated, whatever it takes, so that it covers all of your resources. And on that note, just because you federated things using ADFS 10 years ago and it's still working doesn't mean it's working well or it's protecting you well. You need to evolve those systems. You need to stay up and current with the level of federation or synchronization systems that are out there. For instance, early on, when Azure started to support Active Directory federation, it was all through Active Directory federation services. You had to bring up an ADFS server and you had to do all these things. Well, they quite some time ago replaced that with Directory Sync, right, AD Connect, and those kind of things. Well, there are still customers I run into that have never gone back and really upgraded from when they first put in those ADFS systems. And you need to do that because there's technology and enhancements built into the new stuff that you don't get with the old stuff. So just because you're able to log in doesn't mean you're being protected.
Right. Right. All right. Good stuff. So aside from the best practice, like the top best practice of looking at everything as a whole, are there other best practices around hybrid cloud infrastructure security?
So my next one, the one that I absolutely involve in my daily work now, because in a lot of scenarios I'm operating as a CTO or a CSO or both for different organizations and that sort of thing. And so one of the things that while wearing those hats that I tend to put out there a lot now is a secure fabric, right? So I need a way to protect my systems and the identity management components of my systems and all these different things that's as close to being air-gapped as possible, right? We used to talk about the only secure network as an air-gapped network, right? And there's still militaries that believe in that where, hey, we don't connect it to anything, and that way it's secure. And it's the same concept you get behind companies that, don't let you bring in USB sticks and plug them in and that kind of thing. They're trying to create this physical separation. And you're absolutely right that with physical separation, you've cut off the risk. But we can't often deliver on our mission to enhance the organization, to propel it forward by being completely cut off. So one way we've found to do that, a best practice that we've kind of come up with to do that is by creating what we call a fabric that underlies all of our other resources. So think of it as in the Microsoft realm, if you will. It's an Active Directory forest that sits independent and underneath the Active Directory forest and domains that an organization runs in, where all their user accounts are and everything else. And that fabric forest has very, very, very limited administrative access. And when I say very, very limited, I'm talking about maybe one account and a break glass account kind of thing. And the reason this is so important is because if your day-to-day forest and domain is ransomed, for instance, with ransomware, and you've totally been locked out from it, because we can kind of now get underneath that into the fabric where we're hosting it and doing all those things, we have a much better capability, a faster capability to recover from that ransomware, right? To blow everything away and restore from the backups we've made and that sort of thing. And, as part of that whole fabric development, it's not as simple as, hey, I just created a separate Active Directory. It has a lot of moving parts, and those moving parts include, disaster recovery and taking backups and then shipping those backups off into cloud-based storage so that you kind of have an off-site thing, and then, separating them by great deals of time, because we all know that ransomware often has a delayed timer so that it can try and exceed most companies' backup lifespan, and those kind of things. And so I could spend the rest of the day, not just the rest of the hour, but the rest of the day talking about the technical parts of that. But really, I guess that the point I'm making as a best practice is get yourself some sort of fabric or underlaying structure that gives you the ability to work with your normal day-to-day stuff, even if it is 100% compromised. Even if you had to cut off your normal day-to-day stuff from any client connectivity or anything else, you would still be able to get in and manage it and deal with the VHDs or the VHDXs or the BMK files, any of those type things, and fix them.
So that's really interesting, and I don't want to sidetrack us too much. Like you said, it sounds like that's something we could talk about all day. But just quickly, within the Microsoft, paradigm, the Active Directory, is this something that's enabled by like a specific intentional technology of Microsoft's, or is it more of a process and a way of thinking about your AD infrastructure that you build it yourself? Like, what is this fabric?
It's more of the second, right? So it's more of using the technology that we're already using every day that's built into Windows 2019 and that, but implementing it through a deliberate process and procedure such that it kind of creates a protective bubble, right? So it's kind of like, I guess a good way I can describe it as, a lot of companies, when they do backups, they're doing file level backups inside their virtualized machines, but then they're also taking a backup of the VHD file or the whole virtual machine from the host, right? And
right.
that is one of the ways. So the host is in that fabric. It's in that separate thing. And so when I take those VHD level backups and I separate them, one thing that I can do is I can use management software. I can use PowerShell scripts and all sorts of different things to check for certain types of changes between the file, certain level of data changes and that kind of thing, things that would tip me off to something fishy is going on, right? Yeah. So it kind of gives me that ability to analyze, because you've heard me say other times we've got together and talked that you cannot manage what you cannot measure. Right. So I can't manage my risk if I can't measure my risk. And this is one of the ways that I do this, is by having this separate AD domain, and that's where all my hosts live, and then my VMs are in my day-to-day domain, and so I have this separation. And that way, let's talk about a common attack vector. Somebody is running with local admin privileges on their workstation inside your domain, and whatever reason, but they get malware. And that malware is sitting on that machine, and it's pounding away, trying to get at the network, but it can't because that was a local admin that had been connected. All of a sudden, though, because the machine's acting odd, that person calls IT and says, hey, I got something weird going on here. Will you log in? Well, what does IT do? IT connects and logs in with domain admin creds. Well, now that machine is running in a domain admin cred condition, and the malware is capable of using those creds to start poking away at holes on the network, right? And all of a sudden it starts spreading around the network. The thing is, those domain admin creds that were just compromised have no rights on that fabric. They have no capability of penetrating anything on that second underlying Active Directory forest. So even if your enterprise admin account was compromised, that could not be used by malware or an attacker, whether it be a human hacker or an automated bot, to get at that fabric.
Right.
And, I will say that myself and, my partners, the guys that I work with, we have successfully used that fabric concept to mitigate 3 ransomware events just this year in 2020. So it is proving its worth, right?
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to going at it from the other side. What are the biggest mistakes that you see that people make in hardening or failing to harden their enterprise hybrid cloud infrastructures?
So this is the part where my personality of saying what I think without a filter sometimes kind of doesn't necessarily make me friends, but I think it's important, right? Because I'm trying to help everyone.
Make some enemies for us right here.
There you go, right? Because you and I both know how that works. How can you tell you have a great CSO? Nobody likes them. And this is one of those cases. What I've found, and particularly in the past year, is with everybody challenged to keep their organizations working from wherever, whenever, whatever, they've focused on that and been willing to compromise on security. And I would say that is the biggest mistake. It needs to be the reverse, right? You have to focus on the security, because if they can't do one thing because you haven't empowered it, that's annoying. If by enabling that one thing, you compromise the entire infrastructure and now they can do nothing, that's more than annoying. That kind of makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's uncomfortable because now, as the IT pro, you're going, hey, this is like, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second, but instead of just going, hey, yeah, I'll do whatever it takes and whatever, because we all know what it's like when the CEO or the manager, the boss comes to us and says, I really need this person to be able to do this. Perfect example is something I have going on right now. I have remote vendors that want to get in and work on machinery because they can't travel to the area. And I'm like, sure, we can do that. And they're like, well, we just need to be able to get in whenever across the internet using real VNC. And I'm like, well, prepare for disappointment because it's not going to happen, right?
Yep.
Well, and then you've got business stakeholders going, well, we have to have this or we can't do business. And I'm like, no, you can't do business when that vendor's machine, who we don't control, we don't know how it's configured, has a piece of malware on it, connects into our systems, delivers the malware right past our perimeter defenses and everything else right into our network. Then you really have a problem, right?
Yeah.
Me being annoying right now and saying, slow down, back up, let's do this step by step, taking our time, checking as we go, because you get what you inspect, not what you expect, and doing it right, even in the face of, all the noise that's going on. Because that's a big deal right now. We're not operating in a nice, quiet, take your time environment. We're operating in fireworks going off all around us, cars driving by at 9,000 miles per hour, people dropping balloons from the ceiling. However you want to look at it, the concept is, we're in a live fire exercise. And I can tell you that whatever the domain, IT, military, whatever, in a live fire exercise, calm heads prevail.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, I know my analogies are all across the board.
You got balloons falling from the ceiling, calm heads prevailing,
Yeah.
But you got the point across. Want to get into some things that people were asking about when they registered for the session, and some of the items were technology related. So I kind of wanted to group those together. But I guess first off, any best practices around Azure? And I know that's a broad topic, but like for Azure specific public cloud when you're connected to that, and anything you want to talk about there as far as best practices?
Actually, there's some perfect stuff to talk about here that hopefully is a great takeaway for a few people if they didn't know about it. Many of the Azure licensing plans now include a lot of their evolving security technology, and the Azure security suite. So the endpoint protection, the Azure information protection or identity protection, right? The privileged identity management stuff, all of that stuff is really becoming robust, and it's called Microsoft Threat Protection. But the licensing often already includes it. Everybody thinks they have to go buy more, and in many cases, they've already got the licensing for at least some of it, if not all of it. And if they actually go and do an analysis and say, hey, we don't have the licensing for it, but if we license this, we get identity protection, we get endpoint protection with Defender ATP, we get email protection through Exchange Online, Office 365, and I no longer have to pay for independent products for that and support independent products for that and keep a knowledge base in my IT staff for all those products. It actually comes out being cheaper even if you do have to up the licenses. So if you're not looking at Microsoft Threat Protection in your Azure infrastructure today, I highly, highly, highly recommend you go check it out and certainly take advantage of anything you're already paying for.
That's a great tip. And one question about that. So, a lot of times when you look at an Azure service, it's Azure specific. Do those Azure services reach outside, into more of a hybrid environment?
Some of them do, absolutely, particularly when we get into identity, right? Because you might have multiple identity platforms. You may be actually using some shared identity solutions with not only Azure and on-prem, but maybe some Amazon Web Services or Google Cloud or any of that stuff. So, some of them do. Now, some of them are very product specific, right? So Defender ATP, for instance, is going to protect your Windows clients and your Windows servers. But things like Endpoint Manager, where you can get into your iOS and your Android devices, you can deploy protection through those. You can also get into the email protection stuff, even if you're not only hosting email through Exchange Online or Microsoft 365. If you pass your email through it, you can now take advantage of its security protections. And one nice thing when you integrate everything in the Microsoft Threat Protection Suite, even if something slips by one, it's complementarily protected by the others. So yeah, that was like my Peter picked a pepper, papa, whatever. Moving on. I'm just going to say that you get an infected email and it happens to get by the Office 365 protection. A lot of time, the Azure ATP or the Defender ATP will pick it up and say, hey, this was detected post-delivery, so I went ahead and took care of it for you. And,
right.
That multi-layered approach to security is the only way, in my mind, you can be successful.
Gotcha. The next container or the next technology topic is containers. Containers, serverless computing. A lot of this is really picking up speed, and people are launching applications and either in the cloud or or they're using Kubernetes or different management systems to kind of move things back and forth. Anything that you're seeing there as far as security best practices around containers?
Yeah. So one of the big mistakes I see is that people think, hey, it's a container. It includes all the necessary bits, the DLs and everything, right, to run my application kind of independently or whatever. You need to remember that when you package those things up and you create, say, an image for deployment, in new containers and that sort of thing, if you're not patching all that code, if you're not making sure that it is secure to today's standard, not last week's, not the month before, then it, like anything else, is going to provide a security threat vector. It's going to provide a hole. So you have to manage. You can't just go, hey, because this is a container and it's kind of self-contained and I have this reusable image that I use and, I got a great management philosophy and set of tools with Kubernetes or whatever, I can just kind of leave this go. It's like I talked about earlier with ADFS. You can't do that. Just because it's working doesn't mean it's working the way you need it to, right?
Right.
They had locks 100 years ago. I don't know anyone that would take a 100-year-old lock and protect, their gold vault with it. I'm old enough to say Fort Knox, but nobody will know what I'm talking about.
I do. I know what you're talking about.
Thank you. Appreciate making me not feel so bad.
The next one was PKI, public key infrastructure. Is there a role for that in hybrid cloud security?
Absolutely, and particularly when we get into certificates and both for authentication and for just securing things that we use. So, looking back at Azure, and a lot of people are starting now to take more advantage of Azure Cloud Shell, which is PowerShell in Azure kind of thing, or they're using local PowerShell and connecting to their Azure tenant and that sort of stuff. Well, PKI and using signing and everything for your scripts and protecting them, and making sure that you're controlling your private keys and distributing your public keys as necessary. All those kind of things that we've just talked about for years, they still apply. And if you apply them to your holistic infrastructure, again, looking at everything, they still do what they've always done, and that is help you form a multi-layered defense. So, a lot of people say, hey, PKI is dying or whatever. Yeah, it's just like the people I hear say that, on-prem Windows is dying. It may be, but, so isn't everything that's living. Nothing lives forever, but it can be a long journey till we get to the end.
Well, that's to quote Spinal Tap. That's a little bit too much perspective.
I love it.
But
we got a Spinal Tap reference in our session. That is amazing. So
the next two, I don't know if you want to group them together or not, but CASB, Cloud Access Security Brokers, and then the other question is, tools for managing security. Just what are some of the baseline tools, that are maybe new? I mean, like the old days, it was firewalls and an antivirus, and good locks on your doors. And maybe a couple of other things. What's sort of the baseline set of security tools now?
So, and you're absolutely right. We'll just kind of group all this together, even in including, I know Howard mentioned in his session, the SASE, Secure Access Service Edge model kind of thing. We're going to put all that together because really it is what we've been talking about, and that's trying to create as multi-layered a security defense system as we can that is still manageable. Because if you can't manage it, it's just a matter of time before it breaks down, and you won't know it broke down. So why bother, right? And when we talk about tools, like you said, all those basics are still there. We still have firewalls. We still have routers and switches that have access control lists in them. We still have endpoint protection through the form of antivirus or that sort of thing. But we also have all this new stuff, like I talked about, with identity protection, right? And sensors running on our domain controllers that are looking for missing patches and those kind of things. And one of the big mistakes that I see a lot of people do is they deploy these things one by one by one by one, and they never deploy any tool to be able to watch them in as close to what is known as a single pane of glass as possible. And if you're not watching them, all things degrade over time, in my experience, and it's going to end up burning you. And that's most of the, today, looking at the ransomware event that we were kind of mentioning earlier today. That vector that was exploited was a combination of what we talked about, where they went too far in empowering without protecting, and they weren't monitoring the protections they had, so when some of them were failing, nobody noticed. Okay, so you have to use things that not only get you closer to that single pane of glass where you hopefully can have a screen up, whether it be a dual monitor, whether it be a monitor you hang on the wall, whether it be a TV that everybody looks at in the hallway that's showing some graphs, or I'm a big fan of red, yellow, green type things, right? That give me the traffic light approach, so I can just visually know whether I need to look deeper or not. eNow has some great stuff that monitors Azure and Office 365 and local stuff, and does it in that way with the red, yellow, green approach. But also look at things like if your solution has a logging capability, which almost all do, have you turned it on? And are you collecting logs in one place? And are you performing some sort of analysis on them? Too many people I know collect logs and they only look at them after an event. In today's environment, it is so very vitally important to protect, to prevent, instead of react and deflect, right? Instead of going, oh crap, it wasn't my fault, we got breached. Go, hey, you're not going to like me, but I'm going to stand on the front line and I'm going to protect us and I'm going to do this and I'm going to say, no, it's going to take us longer to set up that vendor connectivity because we're going to do it the right way. Hey, no, we're not going to, move on to that latest and greatest mobile app development until we get, this log analysis where we're taking all the logs that are coming from our switches and routers and firewalls and parsing them and producing a daily report that goes out. Because the thing is with today's tools, it is not super difficult. I mean, it's not super easy either, but it's not super difficult to create routines that will take a bunch of aggregated data and turn it into a daily report that you can spend 5 minutes in the morning looking at and know kind of the condition of your infrastructure, your switches, your domain controllers, your firewalls, your endpoints, all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, that's true. What you were just saying is, coming back to the idea that the CSO who's good at her job is not very popular.
Absolutely.
It's something to keep in mind. So we had some questions come in over sort of more, I grouped them under general considerations. One of them would be which your cloud provider can't help you with. And I think of that, that for me, that brought to mind that model, of what's your responsibility versus your cloud provider's responsibility. But how do you think about that?
So the first thing I say here is, it's all your responsibility. Everybody goes, no, it isn't. What do you mean, blah, blah, blah? And they get all defensive. And I go, okay, something happens. Does the CEO come up to you and ask you if he should yell at you or the cloud provider? I have never, ever once known a CEO go, oh, wait a minute. Sorry, I'll go yell at the cloud provider. So that doesn't mean you have to do every task and you have to micromanage everything, but it means that you have to take this mindset of, I need to learn the right questions to ask. I need to really vet to make sure I'm using the best provider, not the lowest cost, or not just the lowest cost provider, right? I remember, I can't remember the movie, but it was a rocket getting ready to go into outer space, and somebody looked over at the astronaut next to him and said, hey, how's it make you feel knowing that we're sitting on, 100 tons built by the lowest possible bidder? And I'm thinking to myself, that's what you tell me after we're in space, homie.
Yeah, I think that was the right stuff. I think that was the right stuff. Yeah.
I think you're right. I think it was. But the concept is kind of the same. Lowest cost is always a factor, but it shouldn't be the only factor, because at the end of the day, if you make a lowest cost decision and it compromises your security, you get ransomed or your data ends out in the public domain when it shouldn't be and all those kind of things, you will be the one held accountable. You will be the one looked at by the CEO when she comes out and says, how did this happen? Right. And as soon as you say, well, it was the cloud, they're going to stop you right there, because now all they hear is an excuse.
Yeah.
So I know that was kind of more broad, so I will quickly say, as far as specific things the cloud provider can't help you with, the cloud provider can't, and really it's more a won't than a can't, understand everything you need to do to accomplish your organization's mission, right? At the end of the day, they want to make money, and they want to be a partner. They want to help you deliver so that they make money from you, but they aren't living with your customers, with your fellow employees, with your stakeholders day in and day out, so they can't possibly have that perspective. So if you look at any of your systems and you ask yourself, does this system require knowledge of our intimate day-to-day processes, policies, procedures, tasks, and your answer is yes, then you need to assume that you have to take the lead on that, right? You may be able to introduce your cloud provider, you may be able to educate them on that, but don't just assume you can hand it off to them and say, hey, we want to outsource our network management, and your network is tied into these huge PLCs and robotic machinery that are building your parts for all your customers. Yeah, you wouldn't want to just walk away from that. That would not be a good thing to do, in my mind.
Right. Hey, we've got some more questions here, but I want to skip ahead to the audience Q&A portion because we've got a few questions that have already come in, and I want to leave a little time in case anybody else hasn't sort of typed them in yet. But the first question, I guess there was your comments about the fabric sparked some interest. And one question came in from Rich about the fabric. He's asking, would leaving your host PCs in workgroup mode provide the same protection as using a trusted fabric?
So this is one of those where you'd answer of a fashion. And
okay.
What I mean by that is yes, it creates a layer of separation, but as we know, the authentication mechanisms and the security used in a work group, like the local SAM database, for instance, aren't nearly as robust as the Kerberos infrastructure and all those things that are built into Active Directory, right? So creating that separate AD domain, which doesn't require you to buy anything new, it just requires a little extra management, is definitely, loads above just leaving it in workgroup mode. Workgroup mode is still better than having your host join to the same domain as your guests, but
okay.
It's not as trusted and as secure as the other. Now, one time I had a discussion on this very question with somebody, and they're like, well, we want it in a workgroup mode because, what happens if we forget the break glass account information, or we do this or we do that? And I'm like, well, we plan for the 80% and deal with the 20%. And if we try and plan for the 20% or the 2% of unlikely scenarios, and we, say that, it's kind of like me saying that, hey, the maintenance guy's coming over today, and he needs access to the garage, but he may have to go to the restroom while he's here, so I better leave the back door open so he can get to the restroom. And what if my daughter forgot to put hand towels in there, so I better leave the upstairs unlocked? You see how I'm getting here? And eventually my whole house is unlocked, and now I got a problem.
Yeah. Yep. Another question came in from Fritz. He asks, can you speak to the current or future state of multi-cloud networking?
So I wish I could get a little bit of the perspective of how he's using the terminology multi-cloud networking, right? Because it's kind of like the cloud infrastructure. Everybody kind of defines it a little bit differently. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say he had a follow-up question that might help, which is, can you speak to the need for an abstraction layer to overcome the current state of challenge in multi-cloud networking? So I don't know if that might refine a little bit for you what he's talking about.
I'm thinking he's talking about like, hey, we've got AWS, we've got Azure, we've got Google Cloud, and we've got connectivity into each of them, and we need to move things between them. How can we manage and securely manage those transports? And the one beauty that I'd put into there, or beauty is a bad word, but the one positive that I'd put into that complexity is that it's still networking. So we can leverage things like transit VLANs or transit networks. We can leverage site-to-site VPNs like Azure VPNs and Amazon VPNs and those sorts of things to get connectivity into our networks. One thing that I do, speaking to Azure, because I live a lot in Azure, is not only do I have a VPN, so for my customer to their Azure tenant, but then I actually deploy an Active Directory domain controller up into that tenant. So it's a VM running in the cloud. And if you wonder, hey, what's that all about? Well, now all the other VMs running in that cloud can authenticate locally without having to travel across the VPN. If the VPN breaks, people that are connecting in and using things such as WVD, right? Windows Virtual Desktop technologies, they can still authenticate and operate with all the identity protection of my Active Directory forest and domain, even though my on-premise data center is disconnected. And same kind of thing if you're adding other clouds in. Don't just think of them as, another cloud. Think of them as part of the whole. Again, you're just extending it across the whole, as you would if you were a, 10 location manufacturing plant, right? Or that sort of thing. And you can really see this in play if you look at some of the large organizations out there. So let's talk about Amazon and some of their distribution centers, right? These things are massive, and they have massive network connectivity needs for a lot of the automation. But they're also connecting into engineering resources that are all over and everywhere else at many different locations. And everybody goes, okay, well, that's still just kind of one company, one cloud. No, I assure you that Amazon actually uses a lot of other cloud connections to partners because it's in their best interest to do so. I'm not saying they run their proprietary software on Azure or Google or anything else. I'm just simply saying that they connect in and empower the motion between those networks. And I think Fritz throughout there, yeah, he's saying, so I guess I didn't guess too far from the mark. So looking at specifics, like when we talk about the site-to-site VPNs and the transit VLANs, one nice thing is you can use the technologies you've been using, such as access control lists and firewall policies at your perimeter to help protect those other connections also. So you can log against the packets that are coming. I do this often when I'm troubleshooting a problem is I will actually get on the firewall that sits at the edge of the local perimeter and establishes that VPN connection to AWS or whatever, and I'll do a packet capture and look at, hey, how are these packets passing? Are they being caught by a policy beforehand? Are they being tagged as in the wrong VLAN or not tagged at all? That sort of thing, right? And so don't be afraid of the fact that it's multi-clouds. It's just another part of your whole. It's just another location. Manage it like you would adding any other segment to your network.
Well, that brings us right back to your initial number one best practice, which was managing it as a whole. And so I think that's a great place to leave it. John, thanks for all your insights today. This has been really, really helpful and really informative.
Thanks again for having me along, Scott. I always enjoy chatting with you, and you and the audience always ask such great questions. I grow just from the conversation.
Well, thanks again. And I also want to thank Nutanix and Citrix for sponsoring the event today. And I'm going to turn things back over to Tracy for some closing notes.
Great. Thank you. Thank you both. That was a great interactive session. It was really nice to have that and have everybody be able to listen to all your thoughts. So I really appreciate you sharing your time and expertise with us at today's Security in the Cloud 2021 Summit. I'd also like to give a special thank you to Scott for moderating all three events, or all three sessions, and also thank all the speakers who took time to be with us today and make this such a great event. I'd also like to give a special shout out to our sponsors, Nutanix and Citrix, who made today's event possible. We appreciate their sponsorship. And finally, thank you to the audience for joining us and watching the entire event. We really appreciate it, and we hope you gained a lot of new knowledge. We do ask one favor of the audience. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's event, so please complete the short survey that will pop up when you exit. We really appreciate that. And with that, thank you, everyone. This concludes today's event.